that we have with guests in my classes for this program. And the students will probably tell you that's definitely the highlight of not only the class, but the program, because they get to listen to someone besides me as part of the class. And anyway, real great to have you. I know we have not met before. We probably don't travel in much of the same circles, but I really respect your background, your work, and everything. And we loved reading your chapter in the In Their Own Words book. And I guess that's what we'd like to talk to you a little bit about tonight. Let me start off with how'd you sort of get caught up? What attracted you to? How did you get in the business of sort of this whole idea of college teaching and what it means to be an effective teacher and how that should look and everything.
Sure. Well, I'm a cognitive psychologist by training, and so I study learning and memory, and then I've spent my career at teaching intensive universities. Plus, my mother was a elementary school teacher, so I've always had an interest in teaching. And I always thought that, the cognitive principles apply directly to how I teach. And so I thought I tried to do that. And I thought I was doing pretty well until in 1999, I got invited to be part of the Carnegie Academy for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, which was started by Lee Schulman. And Lee was very influential on me. And it's one of those cases where you realize you don't know nearly as much as you thought you did when I heard Lee talk. And so he put me on so scholarship teaching and learning that was in its infancy. This is an idea that Lee Schulman had, and he brought scholars together from across the nation and said, I need examples of the scholarship of teaching and learning because I want to promote this. And so we each sort of took a project on, and I developed my initial project was on use of examples, something that we all do, but actually we think very little about. We come up with them intuitively. We don't really ever assess them to see if they're very effective. And it turns out it's actually very complicated using examples. And so that's what really got me started. And so that kind of became a focus, looking, at some of the intuitions and assumptions that we make when we teach, and from there it just kind of grew. And really, for the last 20 years or so, it's been my almost exclusive focus, just trying to understand both like how to develop a theoretical basis of effective teaching within cognition that also translates to the classroom, so that it's something that researchers use to guide their research, but something teachers can use to guide their implementation as well. And so that's what's come about. And then Victor Benassi, who edited the book, is also very influential. And I early on I started talking to him, and so he's, the discussions led to the two books that he wrote with Catherine Overson and Chris Hackla, and so I have a brief chapter in the first one, and the second one he asked me to write one of the more overview chapters. So that's how that chapter came to be.
Great, thank you. I'm similar in the sense that my training was more in the area of cognitive psychology, but then I sort of drifted off into educational psychology, learning and instruction and teaching and all that. And my first exposure to the scholarship of teaching and learning, I'm envious of you. By the way, we just had at the American Educational Research Association meeting last week, there was a special session dedicated to Lee Schulman, who, as you noted, sort of came up with this whole idea of scholarship for teaching and learning. But I had students when I was at the University of Texas at Austin, grad students who worked in our Center for Teaching and Learning, and they would always talk about the scholarship of teaching and learning. And being an educational psychology guy, I'm like, well, how's that different from educational psychology? Well, it's more focused on higher education, college teaching, right? But when I started digging into it back then, which, like you said, 99, early 2000s, I found that that was one of the places where they were it was sort of a home for learning styles research and things like that. So I started off, no offense, Dr. Chu, I started off with a little less than stellar impression of the scholarship of teaching and learning because I doubted like how authentic and how real the research was there. But as it's gone over the years with people like Reagan Gurung in Colorado, they have since then helped me to be more of a believer, so to speak, in that. Have you had any experiences like that, or have your experiences always been very strong with scholarship of teaching and learning?
Well, it's been pretty strong. Like Regan Gurung is a friend of mine, and so we've worked in tandem, and we've done some projects together before. So yeah, there's a network that does a lot of pedagogical research, and uh, we actually there's a group of us that put out an article in Teaching of Psychology called "The Teaching Manifesto: Practicing What We Teach," about calling on psychologists to like actually use psychology to teach psychology. And the upshot is like, psychologists by their training know more about learning and motivation than most any other field. Why do we teach like everybody else? We should be much more sophisticated, but we actually do the same sorts of lecture kinds of things that everybody else. So yeah, I've, I think I've had, uh, I know, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And there's some legitimate criticism of the scholarship of teaching and learning where it's devolved into, well, this is what I do and it seems to work for me, rather than when Lee Shulman was talking about it, he was talking about it like it's a practice that you capture and you assess and you make public so that other people can try to replicate it. Those are the really key parts, and that's as it moved farther away from what Lee was talking about, it kind of it oftentimes kind of devolved into, well, I do this, and so I've been at quote unquote what we used to call best practices, and it was kind of like, well, I do this and I do this, and it's like, well, why, is this better? So one of my friends, a psychologist named Dan Bernstein, who also does this, his favorite line is like, "What's your evidence for student learning?" This would you could almost like, because that's really the key. It's like it's not just what you do. It's like, what evidence you have that this is either effective or it's like in some way it's capturing student attention in some unique and distinctive way.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to student questions when their hand is up. So, Mary, you have a question.
I do, I do. And I agree with you about that we need to know why we're doing something, why something works. But I wanted to ask you about, and it was a rather soft criticism that you had of Dr. Rosenshine and his principles, because for me, Rosenshine is just vague enough with cognitive principles behind it. And he might not go into a lot of depth, but at least he applies his observations. And it's not really a to-do list. He's just saying, these are the things that are in both of these areas. And one of the reasons that I like him is that he's easy enough for an instructor to digest, but he's not so narrow. Like the book that we're reading now, it's narrow. It's use a clicker, use successive relearning. This Rosenshine is so much more vague. So what exactly would you have preferred, especially for a beginner teacher? I think Rosenshine is good in that way. So what am I missing? That's my
Oh, well,
question.
yeah, and I know Rosenshine's very popular, and it is very intuitive what he talks about using feedback and things like that. The what I'm saying is we need to get away from the focus on practices. So even though Rosenstein says they're principles, they're actually practices. A practice is something you do, like providing feedback. A principle is like a general a general like, I don't know what I'm lost for words there. Just something that's
It,
generally true that informs your practice.
like a
Okay, like
mechanism behind
yeah,
it.
a mechanism. It's a good way of talking about it. So the problem with focusing on practice. So I think Rosenstein is, and believe me, the criticism is not personal. I think he's done a really good job of capturing the practices that good teachers do. The problem is you can't just try to replicate a practice and expect it to work. Any practice can be implemented poorly. So you can give good feedback or poor feedback. So this is the problem that I see, is that we keep on focusing on practices. Like you need to use retrieval practice, which is, based on good research and things like that. But what I want to do is I want to focus on what teachers know, and the mental models that they know. So if they understand how students learn, then that's going to inform whatever practice that they have, right? So what are you trying to accomplish with this feedback? Is this student have misconceptions? Is this student using poor study strategies? If I understand, instead of just I need to give the student feedback, it's like, I'm using my mental model to figure out what the problem the student is having. Then I am shaping the feedback to address that particular problem. Is the student lacking prior knowledge? I need to give the student enough feedback to address that issue. And so that's what in the chapter I go about over those 9 cognitive challenges. If we understand those challenges, then we can diagnose where the problem the student has, and then I can design the feedback to address that problem. So, my criticism of Rosenstein, well, okay, so my criticism in general of the field is that we're focusing on, these best practices, that as if there's a one size fits all kind of solution. As you say, Rosenstein is more vague. There's more room to interpret. What I'm trying to do is say, we can do even better than that. If we understand the cognitive challenges that exist in every classroom, we can diagnose what the challenges is, and then that will inform the feedback and the practices that we do. All right. So the problem I see is that, like, good teachers will do this. So there's a lot of discussion right now on, like, direct instruction. Yeah, and so it's like everyone should use direct instruction, and and good teachers can use direct instruction, but other teachers can try and do it, and it can be implemented, like, ineffectively or inappropriately. But if you know what it is you're trying to create within that learner's mind, then you're going to design, and it's going to help you design effective direct instruction. But if you can't use but let's say you have a student who doesn't respond to direct instruction, you can use some other method, and so the way I see teaching is, it's a matter of constant adaptation. So let's not limit ourselves to one strategy. Let's get in there, and we start with the one that's robust, that usually works, and sometimes that doesn't work, and you move to plan B, and if that doesn't work, you move to plan C. And I think that's what good teachers do. They have a set of practices. They don't think they know the reliable ones, but they're constantly assessing, and if that doesn't work, they move to plan C and plan D and things like that. And I don't think that's really captured within Rosenstein's principles. So that's kind of what
Okay.
I'm saying
I,
there.
I would agree with that. I would agree. I just know that sometimes he does, in his original paper, he did write what were the sort of the cognitive practices, not practices, but I guess the root
Hmm.
behind it. And he did it in a rather shallow way for the teacher, but I understand what you're saying. Thank you for answering. Thank you
Sure,
very much.
of course, and I think he was along the same lines, and I can see why he's popular. I'm just saying maybe we can even go further, and when we train teachers, or when we have education courses like this, we can think about, like, the creating mental models that inform the kind of practices that we choose, and then how we adapt them. And we've all had 2 sections of the same course, and what works in one section falls flat in the next section, and you have to teach those sections differently. And so we want to capture that adaptive aspect of teaching, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Rebecca, you have a question.
I do. This fascinates me, and I love how you said we need to shift from looking at best practice to what is the mechanism that is going to help us and inform us to which we need to use. You also, this research is mostly in higher ed, but I see the need in a huge way in K through 12 education. What's the barrier there? How do we overcome that barrier? Because as a teacher and as interviewing a lot of teachers, it feels like we would be more effective if we could address these things before diving into what we do all the time, if that makes sense, so that we could then inform instead of plan during the summer and just stick with this regimented routine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, so our focus is, when I say our, Bill Serban and I have kind of collaborated on this for many years, although I'm the one who wrote this chapter, but he and I are actually working on a book on this approach and mental models and the cognitive challenges. And we're both college teachers, so all of our examples kind of come from that area. But I think K-12 is exactly right. And I'll be the first to admit, by the way, that K-12 teachers know a lot more about this than college teachers normally do, because you all are actually trained in this area. They let us college professors, they unleash us on poor, unsuspecting undergraduates with minimal amounts of training usually. But yeah, I think the model applies directly, and I've spoken to a number of like K-12 groups and I think it's highly applicable there. And the problem, I mean, I think for K-12 teachers is like they're not as one thing they're trained in the practices, and that their folk, and you can tell me if this is wrong since I'm kind of speaking without experience here. Like they're kind of given practices, but not necessarily a strong foundational basis, kind of like what Dan was talking about, like with learning styles and things like that, the learning myth that will never die. And they're not privy to this theoretical research or this research that's really kind of complicated and things like that. So we're kind of fall into this training pattern of what is the best practice, what's the latest technology. It used to be, I mean, I've had experience with we have a school of education here. There used to be an educational psych course that was required for teachers, and it seems to have gone by the wayside because of other kinds of requirements that may not be true at other schools. I don't know what in-K requirements are these days, but that seems to be true here. No one is teaching ed psych, and I know they've got their plate full with all the licensure requirements and things like that. But yeah, I think schools of education would benefit from more of an emphasis on the cognitive challenges, the cognitive basis of effective learning. And I've had some work with an organization called Deans for Impact, which is focusing on trying to do more of that thing. I haven't worked with them for a while, so I know they're coming out with a new guideline for teachers on the cognitive basis of teaching, but I have not seen what the updated version is. But I would always welcome opportunities to kind of collaborate with people who from the K-12 area and kind of spread this kind of idea more widely. I don't think there's a barrier there other than the fact that the teachers are extremely busy and they've got to teach all these classes and they're more beholden to the professional development they get, which oftentimes doesn't really capture this whole idea of cognitive challenges.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate
Thank you.
it. Brian, you have your hand.
I have them both. So, one thing, first of all, I really enjoyed your chapter. I really did because I was like, I mean, I don't know if you can see this, but it's heavily highlighted, lots of brine stars. Because I was just like, yes, this is what I've been trying to get people to understand. So I'm probably one of the only not professionally trained teachers in here. I'm a nursing educator. So I teach other nurses. But mostly in a clinical setting, with very little, university setting because I don't have my PhD yet. Um, However, and I say that in a light sense, and Dr. Robinson understands it, because nursing PhD is very different from other PhDs. But I want to just make sure that I understood it correctly and have the opportunity to ask you is the way I looked at what you were describing, what you're saying about the mental model is it's a challenge we have in nursing with teaching nurses to critically think. So it's like think through a problem rather than just how to function, how to perform this task. So we call it task based, or task oriented versus critical thinking.
Hmm.
And the way I looked at it with your approach there was you're giving the foundation to allow someone to critically think through why this particular subject is not, or why this teaching method is not working in, like the example you use, this section versus that section. And sometimes it's like you guys have said multiple times, sometimes it's in class to class, it's not even a section to section, sometimes it's same section, just Tuesdays rather than, or Thursday rather than the Tuesday class was different. But the effective teacher, which I think is way more important than the popular teacher or the teacher that checks all the boxes. And I tell people that right away. I'm like, I just want to be effective, because otherwise, what am I doing here? I'd rather be sitting at home in my underwear, you know what I mean, than teaching you guys if we're all wasting our time, because I've got video games to play and movies to watch. So there's lots of other stuff I'd rather be doing if nobody's learning. Um, but don't stand. I'm fully clothed, Dr. Robinson. So the the funny thing, Eric, I just want to make sure I was correct in that and trying to apply it into my nursing brain, what the concepts were that you were discussing. Do you kind of see it in the same way? Is it's like it allows having that mental model and having the background allows you to critically think and adapt.
No, I agree. And we have a nursing school here, and I've worked with a number of the nursing faculty there, and they completely agree with you that that whole critical thinking piece. And it's particularly challenging in nursing because you learn, and medical schools, you learn a lot of procedures. And so, but what you want to do is like to teach your nurses to think beyond the procedure when that procedure, like exceptions to the procedure when there are rare, circumstances, you don't jump for the thing that's closest, you stop and you think about
Exactly.
that sort of thing. And it's, I mean, so you need to teach the procedures effectively because they've got to pass the NCLEX exams, but you also want them to be independent critical thinkers as well. And part of that is, I mean, it's like it is designing. So first of all, I mean, I think this is exactly right because there's misconceptions you need to overcome, and then you need to train them to uh, to recognize, so then, that it doesn't stop there. You have to train them to recognize exceptions. And it's you're really building their knowledge in such a way that it's not like closed off. It's like, I now know the procedures. I'll now be a good nurse to, I now know the procedures, but I'm, metacognitively, I'm thinking like, is this a clear-cut case or is it like, are there like important warning signs that I need to pick up? And I think an effective teacher really does that. And I think if you have that mental model where you can first of all, anticipate misconceptions and correct them, but secondly, design problems that are more, once they've got the conventional, algorithmic knowledge down, to then move it up to like unique or distinctive problems that they, that we're going to challenge them in a new and different way, so that they'll be more attuned to when they run across these exceptions, like, on the job and things like that. So absolutely, that really comes with transfer of training, where you want them to apply the knowledge appropriately in a new situation, and you've really got to build that into the curriculum, because it doesn't happen on its own. All new learning is really context specific, so you need to really focus on generalizing that knowledge.
It's a challenge that we have all the time, because especially in the last few years, because they train to the test is what we say, right? So pretty much they've shortened it because of the nursing shortage that's been looming for 100 years. They've shortened the curriculum and everything to crank them out as fast as they can, and have focused specifically on the NCLEX. And it reminds me, like, we've already had all that discussion on previous classes over high stakes testing and everything like that. It's not valid, but I mean, it's what we have to work with. And so then I get them on the clinical side, and they literally can't think beyond the test, and I have to train them how to critically think. And that is a challenge. It is not a subject where you can just hand them a book and say, here you go, this is going to teach you critical thinking. I mean, it's a challenge to do it. But it's this course, this whole program has been helping me to do that. So I'll shut up now because I'm very long-winded. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Great. Darby, you have your hand up.
Yes. Hello. I had a question more centered on how this could translate into elementary teachers. I think that, there's such an emphasis on best practices. That's like obviously a very big buzzword, but to transition teachers into thinking more about the emphasis on mental models, if you were to prepare like a professional development to bring to elementary teachers, how would you go about informing them about mental models and taking it from how they could then take that into instructional change?
Well, I have spoken to elementary teachers a few times, and they've actually been very receptive to ways of doing things. And I also saw this with my own son, who was when he was going through elementary teachers. Elementary school. It's very interesting how, different teachers, there were ones who were more like informed about cognitive challenges than others. So the design, I think, would be, so there I would like the cognitive challenges are basically the same for elementary children, but of course you have to adapt them to that age, and then you've also got another layer of behavioral layer on top of that. So that is a area where I'd feel more comfortable with collaboration, where I had an elementary school teacher who could like take what I was talking about and speak with more credibility about how that would actually translate into the classroom. There is a big controversy going on right. Well, you're probably familiar with like the whole reading war thing, and now there's math that's coming onto this, and a lot of it has to do with like elementary school teaching of reading and math, and I really think I could contribute to that discussion, but I couldn't contribute to that discussion directly as someone who I would never want to say, oh well, this is what you need to do. It's like, no, but these are the principles, and if you don't follow this principle, it's almost certainly not going to work. And that's really the basis of the whole this I don't know if you're familiar with the sold a story thing, and they were using a method which cognitively just shouldn't work. And so the cognitive challenges can inform you in that, like, there may be multiple ways of doing things, but cognitively we know that this method is almost certainly not going to work. And so I think I could just provide you with those principles of like how learning, the ways to help students learn, to build expertise, to build, automaticity, which is necessary for math and reading. I can tell you these principles, What I can't tell you is exactly how what the best the practices to do it would be in your classroom, but I think it would be, once you understood those principles, you would know what, how to design the practices to achieve those principles. So, that's what I could do for an elementary school. Teachers, I think, is, that cognitive architecture that you need to know, that, what, so you can design what is more likely to be effective and to avoid things that are not going to be effective. So that's the best I could do. I try not to speak beyond my expertise.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Stephen, you mentioned that sold a story, and in the other chapter that we read for tonight by Roe and John Hattie, they listed a number of resources for this evidence-based education. And one of the websites that I had never seen before, so I looked it up, was Evidence for ESSA, which is Evidence for Every Student Succeeds Act. And I thought, well, that's curious. I didn't even know that existed. So I looked it up, and under reading, one of the promoted practices that has very high support is reading recovery, which is what the whole sold the story is, the whole language sort of cueing approach to reading, which is very diametrically opposed to the science of reading that's confirmed now. So we see weaknesses even when we put together syntheses that are supposed to sort of sum up all the evidence. And I was speaking with Gene Glass a couple weeks ago. Gene Glass of meta-analysis creation fame. I knew Gene back from when I was a grad student in Arizona State, and he was talking about this kind of stuff that Hattie does, John Hattie, and meta-analysis in general. He said, the reason why meta-analysis hasn't been as effective for education compared to medicine is that in medicine, we have very distinct treatments. For example, this person's going to get a shot, this many cc's of insulin or steroid or something like that, right? Whereas in education, it's very difficult for us to sort of package the treatment in terms of here's the amount, here's the way in which we administer it or whatever. So we've got this sort of fuzzy definition of what a treatment is or an intervention to begin with, and then we do randomized treatments, right? And that's a gold standard. But what we come up with then is wide variability across studies in terms of we might find an overall positive effect, but if you graph the effects, you'll see that zero someplace over here, it's slightly more on the positive side, but look at the variation, look at the spread of the scores for each of these. And he said that's our main problem in education. We have not been able to find evidence-based education because we insist on doing these incredibly complex treatments or interventions that are so complex they can't be replicated. And we really end up with nothing for teachers in terms of here's what you should do. They're like, what do you mean? What should I do? I don't even understand what this is. Would you agree with that? I'm just curious as to your take on that.
Yeah. So you raise a lot of good points there, Dan. And so first of all, this is one of the disadvantages that teachers have is like there's a lot of weak research out there. And so if you're just counting publications without evaluating the quality, then yeah, you can say this is evidence backed because it's got a lot of it's getting back to what I said, like this is what I do. There's like a lot of articles and so you can, a lot of weak evidence is not stronger than a little weak evidence. You're looking for strong evidence. Now, what is strong evidence? I mean, well, so this is hard in education because you want these randomized controlled trials, but you also want it to be ecologically valid. You want to do it in a classroom, which means you can't control everything. You've got multiple factors that are occurring at once. And this is in the article, I said, like all learning is contextual. You have these multiple factors, and that's what I try to capture in that challenge framework. So, to me, so I have a different approach to a meta-analysis here. So to me, like what works in let's say, an affluent classroom may not work in one that is like has fewer resources. What works in students who have a stronger background may not work in another one. And so the best practice may depend on, how well the teacher adapts it and who the students are. And if you just take a meta-analysis where you're averaging across contexts, you're going to get these weak mixed results. And what you need to do is to figure out in what contexts is this practice most effective. Who is this work for, and what are the boundary conditions in which this doesn't work? And a prime example of this is what's happening with growth mindset research, and it kind of came out. Carol Dweck, put it out there, and it kind of went through this same kind of like, oh, now we just need to all do growth mindset things, and then it turns out, well, it doesn't work across all situations. So then people are saying, well, if it doesn't work in all situations, it must be terrible. So we need to get rid of it. But then Yeager and Dweck have said, they've done meta-analysis, and they say, look, these are the conditions under which it's useful, or these are the students for which it's useful. And I think that's the better way to do these kinds of meta-analyses. And so I think, and I will agree that I think that the early claims were sort of overblown in retrospect on that. But it's like you have students for whom growth mindset interventions are effective or useful. They may not be the whole class, but if it doesn't hurt the class to go through them, there's no harm in doing them. If it might help some students, but it may not show up in a randomized control trial because it's not the whole class. And we also, we're looking for miracles. If you can do one intervention and get a significant increase in learning, then you must have been doing something pretty bad to begin with. I mean, you sometimes these things, they accumulate over time. So, yeah, I agree that meta-analysis is a real mixed method there, and I think the way to do it is to try to identify like the boundary conditions. When is this most likely to be effective? What are the boundary conditions in which this isn't effective? Hope that was kind of that discussion, that explanation made sense there.
No, that was great. And my question was very long, but not quite as long as Brian's. So, Steve, I want to be respectful of your time. I asked for a half-hour commitment. We're a little over that. We have one more question, but if you need to go, I certainly understand.
No, I'm good. I'm enjoying the discussion. I hope you all are finding it useful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Rebecca, you have your hand up.
Yes, this is so useful. Thank you so much. I am kind of pinging off of Darby's question for the elementary specifically. You mentioned that if you were to speak to them and how they were very receptive, you would be able to provide like the underlying mechanism principle, like look at this and then let that inform your decision. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that list exist somewhere? Is there?
Well, that's what, okay. So the article, the chapter I wrote, I think it came out after, so there's an article that Bill Serban and I wrote called "The Cognitive Challenges of Effective Teaching," and it's in the Journal of Economic Education of all places. And I'll tell you why it's there to begin with. Why is a psychologist writing in an economic education journal? But it lays out the 9 challenges that we see, and so it's a synthesis of the learning research. And it tries to like boil it down for teachers into these 9 challenges. And we've talked about, misconceptions, transfer, metacognition, cognitive load, selective attention. And, so basically what teachers are doing is incredibly complex. You're trying to manage all these 9 challenges. So that's the key article.
So that is the 9 challenges. It's not a separate list that goes, okay, instead of it being a challenge that you're trying to overcome by your practice. It's okay. I hear what you're
So,
saying.
well, there's 9
Okay.
challenges, but you're not going to address all 9 necessarily
Okay.
in your class. You're going to like there's probably like, so we just talked about growth mindset. Mindset is one of them, and so maybe you're having a mindset issue with one section, but you're having a prior knowledge issue with another. So
Okay.
you have this framework, and you can use it to sort of diagnose what the problems might be, both with a class in general and with students, and that will guide your like your how you would your intervention or your practice or
Okay.
your lesson plan. So that's those are the that's the solution that the framework that we're promoting, and that's the book I'm writing now is trying to kind of expand that article into book form. So I'd be happy to send that article along to Dan if you're interested in seeing that.
Well,
But it's
and you have that information in, it says the 9 challenges of the cognitive
yeah.
framework. So it's in your article already. I appreciate the clarification on that being the foundation for then how to apply that to elementary classrooms.
Mhm.
And
And that
okay, this is a mindset issue. Here's what we're going to do to overcome that mindset issue with this best practice or
yeah.
such and such. Okay.
And
Thank
that
you.
and I can't write that article. So one of you should write that article where you take these 9 challenges and you try to translate them into the elementary classroom. That would be great. I would love to see that kind of thing, happen. So, you know, uh, but that's the basic cognitive framework, and hopefully it'll translate into like different situations, like like elementary or nursing and medicine. I've had this interest in reading and math and things like that. So yeah, I would love to see someone's thoughts on trying to adapt it, to that particular classroom.
Thank you, Stephen. There is one more question. Let's just do a quick one, Mary, and then we'll let this guy have his evening.
Thank you. It was because you said something that maybe half the class is experiencing a problem in one area and the others. So for me, these are not silos. If a
Hmm.
student has problems with prior knowledge, that's going to impact all of the other things. It's
Absolutely.
gonna, so I don't see them as silos. I see them as running into each other constantly. So I don't see it as 9 challenges. So can you explain to me, is that what you want them to be, silos?
No, absolutely not. And in the article, I talk about learning being contextual, that all these multiple factors. And so each challenge represents a factor that you have to consider, but each challenge depends on others. So, and we try to be explicit about that in the article. Like the more you know, the more likely you are to use effective learning strategies, and it's easier for you to learn, and then the more likely you are to transfer knowledge. So there are these you know it's it's strongly contextual. So the 9 challenges are constantly interacting with each other, and that's what I'm trying to say. Teaching, people look at teaching and it's like, oh, well, you just present the information and you've taught. No, you're creating this environment of all these different factors, and you're trying to create an environment where every student you've got in that class has an entry point to learn. And it's not going to be the same for each student, but you've got multiple opportunities to learn for students with different prior knowledge and students with different learning strategies, and you're supporting each one of them. And it's in a remarkably complex interaction of these 9 challenges. So absolutely, I am not saying they should be siloed. Exactly the opposite. But I will say also, and this is also in the article, that part of the problem with these randomized control designs that learning scientists do is the fact that they look at 1 or 2 factors and they control everything else, which is much more constrained than what teachers face in the classroom. And that's the value of more pedagogical research that's located in classrooms. You have less control, but then you have all these confounds. So that's why I'm arguing in the article that you need them both. You need the scholarship teaching learning, which takes place in the classroom, but it's more ecologically valid, but it's less well controlled, and you need these laboratory studies to establish principles that are highly controlled, but it's not clear exactly how they're going to translate in the classroom. And then of course you need teachers who practice this, who can use it as well. So I'm really arguing for a really ambitious rethinking of the relationship between like teaching practice and teacher education and sort of sort of educational research there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I very much appreciate you going over what I asked of you tonight and giving us 45 minutes of your time very generously. And yeah, as you can tell, everybody loved the reading, love your chapter, and I really enjoyed getting to meet you via Teams for the first time. I think we probably share a lot of interests and things like that. So thank you very much, and really appreciate it.
Well, thanks everyone. I really enjoyed the conversation.
You have a nice evening. Thank you.
You all too. Bye now.